Good evening, everybody. My name is Jessica Gardner and I'm the University Librarian for Cambridge. It is my great pleasure to be hosting this event, both on behalf of the Science Festival and on behalf of Cambridge University Library's year-long programme, The Rising Tide, Women at Cambridge. The Rising Tide has involved hundreds of people across Cambridge colleges and institutions, and our flagship exhibition in the University Library has been visited more than 49,000 times so far. In fact, we're just shy of 50,000, which will be an absolute milestone for us. And I hope some of you will be able to come across, as many of you as you can, to join us for a drink at the University Library after this talk, and an opportunity to see the exhibition if you haven't already, and help us to meet that target of numbers. It'll be absolutely lovely. This event, which is intended to coincide broadly with the International Women's Day, is in many ways the culmination of our programme. Through Rising Tide, the Rising Tide public events actually do continue through to June. That's because we've had so many great ideas for events to put on, thanks to staff and students of the university and many others. But the main exhibition that you have a chance to see tonight closes on the 21st of March. I'm going to be really sad, and I know several other people will be as well. So I'd just like to briefly use this opportunity to thank again everyone who's been involved, from our academic curators, to our staff across the collegiate at Cambridge who've been in support, the steering group, students and academics and curatorial and communication staff who gave much of their time, and as well to all the women, some of whom are here tonight, who joined us last May when we were planning the exhibition and gave us so many good ideas and thoughts to share, and we really appreciate that and want to celebrate with you this evening. Professor Dame Athene Donald was, of course, one of the very first people we thought of when we began planning this programme. Her personal influence on the role of women at Cambridge cannot be underestimated, both through the example of her own exceptionally distinguished career in physics and through the work she has done to champion women, notably through the Rossetti Women in Science, Engineering and Technology Initiative, and as the university's first gender champion, as well as her appointments across the higher education sector, which have been so influential. In November last year, Times Higher Education awarded Athene Donald a Lifetime Achievement Award for her, what they described, I need the collective power of the audience to be indefatigable and pioneering efforts to push gender equality to the top of the science policy agenda. I made that chip up, she never would. I am delighted, therefore, to welcome both Athene Donald and the Vice Chancellor, Professor Stephen Toop, here this evening for Athene's talk. There will be a chance for an in-conversation, and Stephen will join the stage at the end of Athene Donald's presentation. Without further ado, please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to Professor Dame Athene Donald for her address titled 50 Years is Not Long Enough.
Well, thank you very much, Jess, for that very generous introduction. I'm glad to say I don't have to pronounce indefatigable, but... So this title actually arose from a blog post I wrote last summer after I'd been at a Girton event as part of the 150th celebrations there. And I was looking back on my all but 50 years in Cambridge, so I came up in 1971, as you will see, and reflecting on what has and what hasn't changed. And I think Jess read that blog and said, right, we're going to get her to come and talk. So what I'm going to do is give sort of some historical context, something about my personal trajectory here and the things I've experienced, and then a brief look forward. So there's not a huge amount of science in it, but I will touch upon the problem of women in physics because inevitably that's something I care about. So if I can work out how to, yes. So this, I think, is one of the photographs in the exhibition. It's one that I'd seen before. There was a publication produced, which I guess was 50 years after women were admitted to full degrees. And this had this photograph in it. And I find it an absolutely chilling photograph. I mean, I know it's only an effigy, but, you know, violence against women, this is 1897. It's just really horrible to think of the strength of feeling against admitting women to proper degrees, full degrees. Of course, Girton had been going strong by then for a number of years, Girton likewise. So there were women in the university, but they were definitely second-class citizens and not wanted by the masses of men. So we go a bit further forward and things began to change. So this is Barbara Wooden, who was a college lecturer and director of studies in economics, also at Girton. She was regarded very, very highly, and she was actually asked to lecture all the students, which, you know, she couldn't have any official standing, she couldn't wear a gown, someone else's name in the reporter sort of was there to disguise the fact that she actually was giving the lectures. And I just find this, you know, any women who've been in fraught situations may recognise that sensation. You worry about what will go wrong. And this idea that she was wearing two skirts just so that she couldn't cause any embarrassment by the elastic on one of them breaking. So I don't think any woman these days would go to those lengths. Well, they probably were wearing trousers anyhow, which might or might not make it better. Dorothea Garrett was the first woman professor in the university. She was the Disney Professor of Archaeology. And this also, I mean, it threw up all kinds of problems. This is 1939, so still women were not getting full degrees. So she couldn't really be a full member of the university. However, as a professor, she could serve on the Council of the Senate. So there was this problem. I mean, I think from what I know about her, she wasn't the kind of person who wanted to serve on council. So the Vice Chancellor of the time, I don't actually know who it was not, you know, his worries did not come to pass, shall we say. But you know, we were still, this is 1939, I think by that point Oxford had admitted women to full degrees. We weren't doing so well here. So here is the person I think is Queen Mother. She's long dead, but she was finally admitted to the first degree in 1948. Finally, Cambridge sort of caught up. So women could get a full degree. Now, BA Tits, I'm sorry, I just find this such an unfortunate title for what women were like. I know it's short for titular. When I discovered this at Girton, they had, when I was an undergraduate, maybe still do, they have a feast to celebrate women being admitted to full degrees with wonderful college songs about socking it in the Newnham Girl, which is the only line I remember from the songs. But at that point, someone said, you do realise they were called BA Tits, and I'm afraid I just sniggered, and I think, you know, I was marked after that. You know, here's someone who can't take this seriously. But what I didn't know till I went round the exhibition was even when they were admitted, there was a cap on the number of women, and that wasn't actually removed from statutes till 1987. I just find that mind-blowing. May not have been in operation by that point, but you know, this idea that women, you know, do we really want them here, it went on a long time. I remember Rosemary Murray becoming the first female Vice Chancellor. She was president, I guess, of what was then Newhall, now Murray Edwards. And at that point, the role of Vice Chancellor just rotated around the different colleges. So she had the honour of becoming the first female Vice Chancellor. And then if we go to Jocelyn Bell Burnell, a physicist, did her PhD in Cambridge. I mean, she was an undergraduate at Glasgow, which seemed to have an even worse sort of view of women in physics. The idea that she was catcalled every time she went into the lecture theatre, I mean, just horrible. It is surprising that she kept going. But she came here and did her PhD with Tony Hewish. I believe in Churchill we have the chart of this discovery. Of course, Jocelyn is in a way famous for not having won the Nobel Prize, which is a bit tough. But by the time that prize was awarded, she was, in essence, acting as a technician elsewhere. And it's really interesting. She came and gave her, well, she and I had a public conversation in Churchill last year, the year before. And if you want to see it, it's on our website. And it was really interesting. And what she said then, and I think she's getting more frank, as one does when one gets older, she was saying she was really following her husband around because he didn't like the fact that she was successful. I think he was also an academic. So she never, after she did her PhD and had this fantastic discovery, she didn't really get back into being a professional academic for a very long time. And she is remarkably unbitter about her home experience, which is incredible. So I came up in 1971, which was the year before any of the colleges went mixed. Churchill, the man, did contemplate Churchill, the college, of which I am master, being founded as a mixed college. But Jock Colville, who was his personal secretary, said, no, that's not going to work, is it? And said it would be like dropping a hydrogen bomb in the middle of Cambridge, which, So, unfortunately, Churchill was founded as an all-male college. Churchill was the first college to vote to go mixed. There were 3 colleges that went mixed in 1972, Churchill, Clare and King's. Churchill has the honour of being the first one actually to vote. And when I became master, one of the stories I was told, I think to tell me how not to be a master, was that William Hawthorne, who was the then master, was totally opposed to Churchill going mixed and voted against it even at the vote where it was all decided and he lost. And, I don't think it's a very good position to put yourself in. I would like to think if I found myself in a similar position, I would say, you've all convinced me. Of course, I totally get it now. So that I came out on the winning side. But that didn't work with him. This was, again, from the exhibition, this was this badge, Behave Badly, was a set of badges that Lisa Jardine, sadly, the late Lisa Jardine, created to hand out. And so we have the first female lay chaplain at Jesus, and Lisa in later life looking as enthusiastic and wonderful as ever. She was at Newnham, and I think, that reflects something about the 60s, doesn't it? Behave badly, women behaving badly. But it also says a lot that it felt necessary to do that. So now, to get more personal, so this is me in 1971. This is me actually on the top of Skullfeld in my gap year. That's about the only picture I can find of me at that age. And I came to study physics here, natural sciences, from an all-girls school. And I went to an all-girls school, as did many of, still many of the girls doing physics. And no one told me that it was an odd thing to want to do. Because, I was the only girl in the school doing it. But even so, it didn't cross my mind that girls did not do physics. And I think I was really lucky in that, so there was no deterrent. But if you look at this, so this is the Part 2 class. And I have just been told that this is Jean in the audience. So she's back here tonight. There were 8 of us, I think. We were debating this, but only, I think there are 5 of us in the...
Bottom row, second in is Caroline.
Yes, of course, yes. Sorry, I should have ringed her too. I failed to spot her. There weren't very many of us, let's just put it that way. So it was about 8% then. We've reached, in physics, the fantastic number of about 20 to 25% now, so real progress, you can see, over nearly 50 years. I'd assumed, so I did my first degree and my PhD here, and went to the States in 1977, as the colleges, more and more colleges were becoming mixed, and I assumed when I came back here in 1981, that would all even out. And I went into the practical classes and I looked around and thought, not much changed here. And of course the problem specifically for subjects like physics, not only physics, but physics as a key example, of problems that aren't anything to do with Cambridge in terms of those numbers. They start much, much earlier. So, you look at what merchandise there is out there. This is a baby grow for what, a year old, maybe 6-month-old, and the girls one, the pink one says, I hate my thighs. I mean, come on. And the blue one, which is of course for the boys, says, I'm super. We really do not give the right messages to our children. And, I'm a grandmother now, and you try and find baby grows that aren't sexist, that aren't pink and blue. I want a green baby grow. It's really hard to find it. So, some places go to some, greater lengths. So this is girls can't what, and obviously a trainee astronaut there. Even so, on a year-old baby girl, it's probably not terribly helpful. But the problems are just everywhere in our society. It's in the way we handle children. If you give a random adult a baby and don't say if they're a boy or girl, they will treat them in one way. But if you say, this is a girl, they're much gentler. And if you say it's a boy, they sort of bounce them up and down. There's plenty of studies to show this. The toys are gendered. The language we use, the expectations, just wherever you look, our society treats boys and girls differently. And, you know, Cambridge is way too late to change any of that. So as an example, this is something that was found in a Lego box, in a typical Lego box in 1974. And it explicitly says, you build whatever comes into your head the way you want it. A lot of boys like dolls' houses. They're more human than spaceships. A lot of girls prefer spaceships. I mean, can you imagine a message like that being put in a Lego box now? I can't, because what we get... Oh, sorry, this is 1981, so again, you've got a girl just being allowed to be free with primary colour bricks, so none of this pink stuff. And this is what they sell now. And, you know, I could talk for hours about the evils of Barbies, but I won't. But what I would say is that if you only give girls things like dolls, Barbies, whatever, then that is what they think they have to do. If you give them Meccano, maybe they'll work out that putting things together is interesting and turn into engineers. But we can't create engineers who've been brought up on a diet of pink, whatever these are. This is data, it's quite old data now, maybe 8, 10 years old, that the Royal Society put together during the time I was chairing their education committee. And it's looking at A-level choices. So by A-level, you sort of set on your path of what you're going to do for your career, in the sense that you are closing off options. I mean, you're probably closing off options from 14. And I think one of the reasons this country is so bad is because of this early specialisation. If you're in the States, if you're doing a baccalaureate in Europe, it's totally different. A-level choices, size of the letter reflects the numbers. So B is biology, C is chemistry, and P is physics. And that's the overall breakup. So a single letter means you're just doing biology, and maybe you're doing history and English as well. And the 3, B, C, P, says you're doing the 3 different sciences. But if you look at that by gender, you can see just how few girls do physics in any combination with chemistry or as 3 sciences. But particularly if you were thinking of coming here to read natural sciences, but to specialise in physics, you probably want to do physics, chemistry, and double maths, or at least single maths. This is the similar picture for boys. You can see huge numbers do single subject physics, and probably with maths and go on to do physics or engineering, and far fewer do biology. So we have 80% girls doing in the vet school, 20% boys, and we have 20% girls doing physics, 80% boys. It's not right in either direction, and I think it's important to say that the boys are probably getting as penalised by this in a different way as girls. It's perhaps worth saying that my son, age 11, I went to his parents' evening, and the English teacher said, well, boys can't do English. I just thought, you know, you're writing off 50% of the population at age 11, and you know, I think teachers do a fantastic job in very difficult circumstances, but some of them do have some prejudices that I think are unfortunate when it comes to gendering. So, let me go back to my personal story after that little detour. So, in 1985, I took up a lectureship. I didn't actually know I was pregnant. I was about 6 weeks pregnant, and pregnancy tests weren't as good then. I also didn't know I was the first woman to get a lectureship at Cambridge, because there were other women around, and it turned out, I discovered years later, they were all on soft money, which I hadn't known. So the university was really generous with its maternity leave policies at the time. I had been a university research fellow funded by the Royal Society, but paid through the university. So having done that for 2 years, I was entitled to 16 weeks paid leave, which was a lot better than 6 weeks statutory maternity pay that one would otherwise have got. So I took my 16 weeks. I still ended up writing a new lecture course when I was on maternity leave. I can remember it well. I had my baby, a PK to my shoulder, trying to write this lecture course. And it was the first really new lecture course I'd given. Obviously, I had in fact been lecturing during my URF, but I'd inherited that course from someone else. It was quite tough, and these days I hope departments do not expect their staff on parental leave to do such a thing. I was pregnant again 2 years later, and someone said to me, not again, but that was about the nastiest thing that anyone ever said to me. People were very, very generous. But I caused a slight problem because I wanted to take 2 weeks unpaid leave, and The HR people said they didn't think an academic had ever done that before. They got it sorted, it was fine. And this picture I find astonishing. I won a prize from the Institute of Physics around this time when I was on maternity leave. And they said, can you send us a photograph? So I did. And they said that was unsuitable and cut out the children. Except they couldn't quite cut out my daughter. And as someone said, they must have been wondering what piece of equipment that was. But I was so angry. It seemed to me that absolutely the message should have been, you can succeed and have children. And instead of which, at that point, I mean, they wouldn't do it now for sure, but at that point, that was regarded as the wrong message to give about women. Women, you know, have to be above such things as having families. I moved up the ladder. I became a reader in '95, and there were 5 women across the university. I don't know how many promotions there would have been in total, maybe, I don't know, 20, 25. And so the university was very excited about the fact they got 5 women being promoted, and they wanted to run a story with one of the Sunday papers. And I'm glad to say they didn't, because I think it was, again, the wrong message. You know, it should have been, we're just progressing. You know, it's perfectly normal that we've got 5 women being promoted to reader. I became a professor 3 years later, and at that point I was the first woman to be a professor in any of the physical sciences in Cambridge. And at some point later, I mean, just mentioned the WISETIC, the Women in Science, Engineering, Technology Initiative. There was a dinner after the talk, and the then Vice Chancellor, Alec Brewers, was there, and I was sitting next to someone from his department who was having a moan about my department in the way one does over dinner. And she relayed this to Alec, who turned to me and said, I thought the problems in physics were solved when we made you a professor. And I mean, I still see Alec very often, he's a great guy. I haven't reminded him that he said that, because I feel that's kind of not the right message. Yeah, there were problems in physics, they were probably no worse than anywhere else, but there were problems. And he should have realised that, you know, one swallow doesn't make a summer. So I was appointed after that to loads and loads of committees, because they didn't have any other women from the physical sciences who they could put on boards of lectures or whatever. I did get this sense that I actually wasn't really being listened to, and if I argued for something within my department, you know, I never felt I quite got the attention that I thought I should. And I find it, some years later, by which time I was deputy head of department actually, my very supportive head of department suggested I had voice training lessons, because then that'd be more persuasive. And that kind of thing makes me pretty cross too, because, you know, so a man with a deep voice could talk complete rubbish, and that's more important than a woman with a high squeaky voice. I'm sure he didn't mean it like that. He'd been watching too much Maggie Thatcher, I think. So this is the cartoon that many women in the audience will realise has described a situation which they have been. It's from 1988, it's a Punch cartoon. And the idea that a woman can sit there and the chair will say, that's an excellent idea, Miss Triggs. Perhaps one of the men here would like to make it. There is that sense occasionally that that still applies in some university corners. And it was around this time when I became a professor and also an FRS in 1999 that MIT did their own report, and it was a really seminal report. It was looking at the status of women, and it pointed out that there were systemic problems, that when they looked, the American system being different from the Cambridge system, when they looked at salaries or when they looked at the amount of lab space that professors had, there was a discrepancy between the men and the women in ways that could not be attributed simply to the women, you know, not being so good kind of thing. And it pointed out these are words I can't say. Marginalisation increases as women progress through their careers at MIT. When you're if I can put it this way, a sweet young thing, people can patronise you. I'm being very cruel to the men, I'm sorry. But there is that sense that when you're young, you're not a threat. And as you move up through the system, it actually becomes harder. And I realised that that almost certainly applied to Cambridge, and I've not realised it. It's very easy for women to think they are the problem. It's very easy to internalise the message, if I'm not being persuasive, it's my fault. If I am not succeeding where the men are, it's my fault. And to realise that maybe that wasn't true was actually a very uncomfortable realisation. To realise that there probably were systemic things, and I never thought being a woman was a problem, and yeah, actually it was. It's interesting, MIT followed up some years later, and they showed that things had improved there. But there was the worry, I mean, America has affirmative action, which we do not. And there was the sense that women were getting appointed, promoted, because they were women and MIT wanted to be seen to be doing the right thing. So, in 2011, I don't know if MIT have done anything since, but even then they had a long way to go, and I suspect they probably still do. These things probably apply here, but that analysis per se has not been done. And I think there are many, many supportive people, men and women, but there are also pockets of less good practice, shall we say, that impact on minorities of all kinds. And I'm only talking about women here because that's what I know about, but I think they impact on minorities of all kinds. So where are we now? This is data from the most recent Equality and Diversity report. And it looks at the percentage of men and women in each grade, and you can see overwhelmingly in the top grade, professors and senior academic related, a huge proportion are men. I mean, far more than, well, I don't know what that works out at, about 3/4 men. Whereas it's much closer to parity at the lower grades. And of course, or in fact with a preponderance of women at the lowest grade of all, and that reflects, or is reflected in the gender pay gap, inevitably. And some of that is grade segregation. We have a lot of women cleaners, say, and we don't have many women professors, and so when you do the formal gender pay gap, you see there is a significant difference, not the same thing as it not being equal pay for equal work. It is down to grade segregation and really hard to challenge and to change. Perhaps more telling, if we look at these, the gender makeup of committees. So I'm in the School of Physical Sciences. The Council of the School of Physical Sciences has 6.3% women on it, which I guess means 1. Now there are more women than that in the School of Physical Sciences. If we look at most of the other schools, they're slightly more balanced. But it worries me that human resources and E&D are more than half women. I mean, that's what is that saying also about why aren't there more men on it? And I can remember, I don't know how long ago now, probably shortly after I became professor, I was asked if I would chair the university's childcare committee. And I said, how many men have you got on that? And they said, none. And I said, well, invite me again when you've got some men on it. And, childcare is a problem for everyone. It's not just the women's problem. All these numbers show that we have a way to go, that there are still inbuilt perceptions as well as simply the lack of numbers at the highest grades to populate some of these committees. So if we look, this is also from that same report, if we look at the numbers of women professors, it's steadily increasing, and that's really good. However, if you look at the number of female, senior lecturers, they're decreasing. So our pool of people who might be appointed is not actually increasing. And that is not good news. We have a problem. It's not just at the top, it's everywhere. We need to work out how to make sure that we can really build up the numbers towards parity in this university. And I mean, this statistic down here is nothing to do with this university, but I think it says a lot about the situation everywhere. The gender gap will take 108 years to close. And economic gender parity, 202 years. It's not encouraging. And it's not encouraging for the young women starting out, because they will see there are still systemic problems everywhere. If we look at the undergraduate, which is where the people are starting out, I can't really look at the numbers sensibly in physics or biology or something because of the natural sciences tripos. It's really hard to pull the numbers out. But we can look, so this is data, I'm afraid I can't remember where the data came from, but it's all students in subjects across, I'm not going to know if it's the United Kingdom or just England, but you get the idea. And we can look at the Cambridge proportions. So we're not actually doing too badly in computing, which when I look around my college I find quite remarkable because we don't get many women. Or in engineering, we're doing reasonably well. In maths, we're way behind the national averages. And in medicine, we're actually behind in the sense that in most places there are more women studying medicine. So our pipeline is a problem, and that goes back to what do we do to our children in the early years. But we do have problems. We are not going to get, we do actually have a female head of the computing department at the moment, but you know, we're a long way from starting out with equal numbers. So there are students starting, but they still, if you do a plot of where women are at each grade in different subjects, they fall off. You can describe it as a leaky pipeline, but that's not a very good analogy. Are they leaking? Are they choosing? Or are they being pushed out? And the answer is all of the above, I'm sure. And there are many reasons that contribute to it. It's not a simple problem to solve. There is, of course, bullying and harassment that goes on. I really worry about what happens in PhD groups, where if that relationship breaks down, and it's not just about women, if that relationship breaks down between supervisor and student, or indeed between one student and another student, in the sciences, your research group is so important that is a really tricky problem to solve, but needs to be. More subtle, sorry, I'm getting tired, I've forgotten how to use this thing. More subtle are things like disparagement and humiliation. And again, if you think about a group of students doing PhDs, maybe they're giving a presentation, and if there is allowed to be sort of humiliation, you really think that's an exciting result, that kind of comment, which, you know, it's not exactly criminal, but it's really miserable. And if that kind of thing is directed at you all the time, are you going to think you want to stay in academia? There's a lot of evidence about letters of reference being gendered, that men are much more likely to be branded as excellent, outstanding, that kind of thing, whereas women are often described as good team players and nice to have around. Well, you know, if you're trying to appoint a new lecturer, which are you going to go for? You're not, I mean, being nice to have around is a good thing, but it's not going to get you a job. Social exclusion, people not tapping you on the shoulder, you know, that kind of thing. Academic sabotage, someone was telling me about a story, it's a horrible story about academic sabotage. I hope that's quite rare. Lack of mentoring and sponsorship. I was fantastically lucky. I had brilliant mentors, just about all male. I don't think you need a woman to mentor a woman, but you do need someone to. Lack of role models. Some of our buildings have an awful lot of elderly white men. I mean, the Cavendish used to have a lot of people, elderly white men in bow ties. I always felt even the young men probably didn't really feel they were good role models. And after a lot of fuss, I made them take those photographs down. I mean, they were sort of, all the FRSs had gone through the department up till, I don't know, probably when the new Cavendish was built or something. They were not inspiring. They may have been fantastic scientists, but they weren't role models. Women do tend to get overloaded with academic housekeeping, the sense of, oh, you know, you'd be so good at the pastoral role, and how much does that count when you're trying to get progression? So I think we have to be really aware of how different tasks are allocated. They may not be given opportunities for leadership because people don't see women as suitable for leadership. There may be double standards, which is something I've become very conscious of. If I've sat in committees, not in this university, and I've seen you know, a woman being described as, well, she's got 3 patents to her name, and everyone says, oh, and did she make any money out of them? Have they been taken up? That kind of thing. And you know, some candidates later, you come across a man who's got 3 patents to his name, and it said, oh, isn't that fantastic? And on this particular occasion, it really brought it home to me. One of the men around the table said, you've got a double standard there. I hadn't spotted it, and I'm much more conscious of it now. And I think it's actually what Goethe said 2 centuries ago. Girls we love for what they are, young men for what they promise to be. Women are judged not on potential, and men often are. And it's a sort of unconscious, it's just one form of unconscious bias. I think the university staff survey will have given everyone pause for thought. There were some very encouraging things in there, but there were also some really quite worrying things. Only 27% of staff think that development and promotion opportunities are fair, and about the same number, I don't have very much confidence in the senior academic promotions, even though a lot of work's been done on it, and childcare provision is never regarded as adequate. But in a way, what is more disturbing is this. 17% said that in the last 12 months they have witnessed what they considered to be bullying behaviour, harassment or sexual misconduct. But 20% did nothing because they didn't think action would be taken, and 13% thought it would damage their career if they brought it up. That's really troubling. And I don't know what you do about it. It's incredibly difficult to resolve these issues, but we have to have, and I'm sure the Vice Chancellor does have, a real commitment to trying to improve our working environment for everyone. It's not just about women, it is for everyone. The scale of the problem is huge, and it's a really, I believe the phrase is wicked problem, because there's no easy answer. So going forward, I think I would conclude that progress is slow, it's not non-existent, but in the nearly 50 years I've been here, some things have changed, like maternity leave policies are much more generous even than my 16 weeks. And there is no absolute glass ceiling, there are no caps, there is no idea that if you've got one woman professor in the department you can't have two. But there are still pockets of resistance. And I think that most women would know that there have been times when really quite negative things have been said to them, not necessarily with evil intent, but that just discourage. And it comes back to, do women leave voluntarily or are they pushed? Yes, I've been told both that I was too emotional and needed a thicker skin. I've been told I lacked experience, even though I had more than the person who got the job. Or they're told they only got the job because they're a woman, which is also a really miserable message to receive. And this idea of the Miss Triggs cartoon, their views were talked over or ignored. This academic housekeeping does seem to mean that women end up doing more in any workload model. You demonstrate in the Cavendish, one of the things that was very clear was how much that women tended to be the ones doing outreach. I mean, there's no need for that to be so. I'm sure men are wonderful at going into schools, but they don't to the same extent. This thing, it's, you know, the university during the time I was gender equality champion was very conscious about the percentage of women on committees. So every committee had an F against each woman. Just so you knew. And I drew the head of HR's attention to this. And he said, oh, you mean we're assuming people are male by default? And I thought, yes. And I think now they have M and F. But that, of course, in the modern language of gender fluidity, that may not work either. I don't know what's being done about that. So what to do? I haven't talked about unconscious bias. I hope you all know what unconscious bias is, and I'm sure this university is no worse than any organisation in the fact that we're all biased in different ways. We all have the most, you know, we don't know we're doing it. And my own shaming story was coming back from York, I think, on the train, and I was sitting at a table, so there was a group of 4 potentially, and I was on my own initially, and then 3 young men got on wearing hoodies, and I thought, oh, this is going to be a noisy journey. And they sat there and they discussed playing Bach on an organ. And I thought, oh, goodness me. I mean, we all have biases. And it's important to recognise this isn't men being biased against women, it's women being biased against women, and all of us being biased against, you know, whatever it may be. Young men in hoodies, in my case, apparently. We can think more about role models and imagery. I think imagery, particularly in the colleges, is an issue. In Churchill, we only have 1 portrait on public display, and that's Winston Churchill himself as a young man, and I feel okay about that. So we should think more about ways of making people feel included, that they belong. And I think perhaps, you know, a central message is we need to change incentives, the way we work and what we value, so that it is not sufficient just to go for the person with the largest grant income or the largest number of publications, but actually to look at what else they're doing. Are they training their students? Are they looking after their students? Are they mentoring them? These things matter. And this book, it's now 6 years old, I think, that was produced. You can tell I got to the end. This book that was produced towards the end of my time as the gender equality champion, it's still available, I think, on the website or probably where it was downloadable. And it gave 25 stories from women around Cambridge in different roles. They aren't all academic by any means, about what they valued. And I think the idea at the time was that this would start a national conversation. It didn't happen. I mean, I talked about it quite a lot and everyone said, oh, that's really wonderful. But I don't think it has at all changed the way in which we assess what makes a successful person in terms of their career and the way they treat others. I think the staff survey highlights that we have pockets of resistance, pockets of bad behaviour, which really can be very damaging. And if we don't get some of these things right, we will still be having this conversation in another 50 years. I won't be there to see it, but some of you may be. Thank you. And I think now Stephen's going to join me. He'll no doubt quiz me on some of my facts and figures.
Well, thanks, Athene, and in many ways a rather demoralizing picture. Obviously, some progress, as you say, but frankly, just not enough, and we know that. So I want to start where you finished, which was the idea of incentive structures, because that clearly in academia plays an important role, and as we know, most of the incentives are different from in the wider world, the business community particularly. So looking at, you mentioned promotions. There's also a question about what is valued in CVs. You started to talk about that. You talked about mentoring as relevant here. Also, I suppose you've talked in the past about the role that people play as academics in the wider society and bringing their work forward. So what do you think needs to change? What would the 2 or 3 key issues be on incentive structures from a perspective of promotion?
I think we have, as a university, moved away from simply people looking at the weight of publications, if you like. But I don't think, I'm not aware there is any way that people are actually assessed on, are they good supervisors, as opposed to, do they have a lot of students who produce a lot of papers? And I think that's a really crucial thing, that we are not saying, what are you doing to improve the environment? And I don't mean sustainably, I mean your working environment. And the Royal Society, and I think Wellcome have done something similar, have produced alternative ways of presenting CVs, which would be for promotion, but also for appointment in the first place. What have you done to improve the lot of the people around you? I can't remember the precise wording. There were sort of, I think there were 5 sections. And so you were meant to give a narrative against these questions, which could obviously be tweaked according to circumstances. And I think that way you tease out the people who were actually thinking about their responsibilities in this wider space. Are you doing outreach, for instance, which I don't think gets much credit, and yet is really important, and it does matter for wider Cambridge. I could give a different lecture about diffusion and the fact that Cambridge University is fantastically successful in an overheated city, and yet not far down the road, life is very different. We should worry. We really should worry, and if everyone talks about levelling up in terms of the north of England, but we should worry about it in the Fens. That's a bit of a digression.
Part of the challenge, I always think, is getting people to move outside their own experience. Because if you brought up, I've chaired lots of hiring committees. In fact, I just did one yesterday. And I am always struck that people are in some ways trying to replicate the experience
Yes.
that they had. And so if what they experienced was, you know, how many publications in the top 5 ranking journals and how much the grant money is, that's what they tend to revert to in the conversation. And getting that conversation to change
Yes.
is what you're describing.
Yes.
But that has to happen at every single appointments committee
Yes.
for there to be systemic change over time.
But if the sort of template for what was expected of applicants was centrally altered, then it would be harder for individual committees not to go that way. I think there is also the problem that people want to appoint people who look like them as a young man, or sorry, as a young person.
Absolutely. I think you do see that. I think people try, to be fair.
I
I
think
think
it's
they
getting
try.
better.
Yeah, but I'm not sure they always succeed.
No.
And that's the interesting thing. So I started by saying it was somewhat demoralizing, and it raises for me an ethical question, which I have struggled with in my own life, and I'm curious as to whether you have. When I was a dean of a law faculty as a young professor, the subject I taught tended to be a subject or group of subjects that had quite a number of women who were interested. I taught family law, I taught human rights, I taught international subjects, had a lot of women who would come and want mentoring and career advice, and I would obviously be very happy to do that. But I always struggled with how frank to be about the difficulties that they would face given the experiences of my own cohort of friends who were women in a profession. You've been there, you've been in a profession, academia, where the numbers are what you've just indicated. How do you balance encouragement and telling people they can succeed, which is hugely important, and this lousy story that you are still having to tell?
I think if you don't tell it, you are in a way denying their experience.
Yes.
And so, you know, I think one has to say, yeah, if you thought you were being talked over in that committee, that's probably right. And here are some things you can do. And I think that, you know, that kind of thing in the mentoring role, people should know what tricks there might be up their sleeve. I mean, I'm a great believer in amplification. So the idea, which is quite a lot talked about now, that if you see anyone being talked over or their views being reinvented by someone else, a third person steps in. I mean, it's bystander training. You know, having someone else support the person who is losing out. And I think we could do a better job of, you know, we're doing bystander training amongst the student body for very different situations, but I think we could do more amongst the academic body about how to support people who are being, you know, disadvantaged in some way.
And that's something that everyone has a responsibility to do, not just people of the same gender or whatever.
Absolutely. I mean, it may be apparent in the case of gender, but it's all over the place. And I have come to the position, which is not a comfortable position, but that if you see something, I sound like the railways at the moment, if you see something that doesn't look right,
see it, say it, sort it. Right.
Don't be complicit. Exactly. Say it. Call people out. And I don't think, you know, there are too many places where people feel, oh, I can't do that. And I think we have to make it acceptable that if something is going wrong, you know, if the chair never brings in that person sitting in the far corner because they don't want to or they can't see them, you know, other people can say, oh, I think John wants to come in there. Yes.
So you raised this question in the statistic reporting back from the staff survey, which I found actually the most worrying single statistic in the staff survey, which was, you know, I won't do anything about seeing something worrisome, bullying, harassment or whatever, because A, quite a number of people said, I don't know that anything will happen, or it might even damage me.
Yes.
We have to get at that because, I mean, there are campaigns, you've got Breaking the Silence. We've been running this campaign now for 3 years around this particular issue, but this is recent data. So even with that campaign, there are people who appropriately, I guess, feel that they can't speak up. How do we change that dynamic? That's something that is happening at all levels of a university, and
Yes.
it's not something that can just be mandated.
No, and I think we have to give people confidence that their careers will not be damaged. And of course, we all know situations where they almost certainly will be. And I'll come back to the supervisor-PhD student relationship, because there is no doubt that if a PhD student makes their supervisor's life difficult and they are still dependent on them for a reference, they are in terrible trouble. What I do believe is that there is safety in numbers, and that in some situations there will be 3 people who observe something that doesn't look right. And if they have the confidence collectively to do something, I think that is quite powerful. Now, lots of things will go on behind closed doors, as it were. But I think if we make it easier for group complaints, if you like, then that may help to change the way people think about how their concerns will be listened to.
Processes then also have to be sympathetic to complainants, if I may put it that way. You
Yes.
can't have a process that runs someone through an appalling experience all over again. I mean, we've been through this obviously in sexual harassment cases,
Indeed.
and why I and many others felt it was necessary to change the burden of proof
Yes.
in those cases.
Yes.
But this is a much broader issue.
This is a much broader issue, and we're not talking about things that might be criminal. We're talking about just bad behaviour. I mean, people have been behaving badly. I mean, Lisa Jardine, of course, encouraged us to behave badly, but in a slightly different way, I think. I think she just meant, don't shut up, which is not the same thing. People have been behaving badly for centuries, and we have to accept that people will see what they can get away with, but also make sure they don't get away with it.
You have been indefatigable in really bringing the whole question of gender inequality in the academic world forward again and again and again. Was there a moment in your career, which you described succinctly, was there a moment in your career where you suddenly felt more comfortable in raising these issues, or was this something that really early on you started to feel you had a role to play?
No, it certainly came much later, and it came not because I was more comfortable, but because I was angry about what I saw. It came out of anger, and it took me a long time to realise that, if you like. Because I was already a professor and I was an FRS, I realised that people would listen to me. I remember the then PVC for HR, as I think the title was, I said, can I come and talk to you? And he said, yes. And I thought, oh, gosh. I was slightly surprised. And it came out of anger, because I could just see, not just my personal experience, but some of that. And I feel more comfortable talking about that now. For a long time, I downplayed that.
You mentioned Dr. Burnell not having that anger. I had the great privilege of speaking with her at a wonderful event at the library, and that was my reaction too. How could you have been through this and describe it in such a dispassionate and unangry way?
I know.
But I don't think we can't expect that, and shouldn't, is my point.
No.
I mean, the anger is not an irrational response to inequality. So, when you say it took you a while to feel that you could express that anger, or that you had to, in a sense, suppress it, was that because you felt that you would be damaged by it, or that your career would be damaged by it, or was it something more internal?
I think what I meant, and I'm not sure it came out quite right, I think I knew at the time that I was not going to go on just letting things go on. I was going to speak up. But I think it was, looking back, I realised how powerful that anger had been. I think that's what I meant. That, at the time I was just following my nose, and it wasn't premeditated that, if I do this, then. It wasn't like that at all. But I realised that using that anger as a positive, and being a senior woman, did give me a position that I hadn't thought through, if you like. It wasn't a careful plan, like most of my life.
And my last question, and then I'm sure we want to open it up to people in the audience. Do you think, when you were starting to really be more able to raise these issues forcefully, did you start to feel that you were being supported by others around you, or did it feel lonely for a long time? And maybe it still does. I hope not.
No, not really. I think I get... no, I won't say that. I think I was very much supported by people in HR. I mean, there was Felicity Hunt, and the then PVC, and various, seemed to be a series of heads of HR. And I think I got support there much more than from my academic colleagues, who probably weren't quite sure what I was getting up to, if you like, you know, because this wasn't in my job description.
Gives me an opportunity to shout out to the E&D group now, because they work tirelessly on these issues still, and not just on gender, but on race and other forms of inequality, and they really work incredibly hard for us.
Hugely important.
And tough.
Yes.
All right, I think we've got a couple of microphones, so those who would like to speak, I think, Athene, you're going to run your own Q&A here.
Right. So there's one right at the front. And I guess these questions can be directed to either of us.
They're more interested in you, I suspect.
Can I just ask what your views are on non-disclosure agreements? Because it just seems to me that every woman that signed one, if they all joined together, some of this progress that you're promoting would have happened by now. Is it a barrier to actually progressing?
I have no knowledge of NDAs being used in the university for covering up that behaviour. I mean, I just have no knowledge. I've seen them in other places, and I know how damaging they can be. I mean, sometimes I think NDAs are a way of allowing underperforming people to leave smoothly. And I think that's a totally different kind of NDA. But where they are used so that someone can leave with their reputations untarnished and go off to somewhere else, I think that is really dangerous. On the other hand, sometimes the options don't seem very great.
Thinking generally as well, not just an academic.
No, well, I think there are those which I would perhaps countenance, and those I am much more worried about. This one, yeah.
Comment on a meeting that happened in my department just this afternoon. So it was about the university staff survey, and everyone, 20% of us feel bullied or harassed. So, so the department called a very laudable meeting, and why was this? And one of the senior women, one of the vanishingly few senior women in my department in the breakout group said, oh, well, maybe it's something to do with with shedding female professors rather than gaining them. You know, there aren't any in the department. And I'm not judging that comment in a negative or a positive way, but it sort of made me think, so in order to all be nice to each other, we need senior women around, and if we don't have any... Is that true? Should it be true? You know,
No,
is that...
of course not. And I know some really nice men. But I think, and I know some not so nice women, actually. I think it's really dangerous to go down that route. It should be about treating people with dignity and respect, and it's about people. And inclusion is what it says. And I think one consequence of having more women may be a different environment, but that shouldn't be a driver per se. Right, there's one in the middle there, and then there's one down at the front here. So if you like to get your microphone down there, put your hand up again so she can find you. And then there's one there, yes.
Am I going first? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Sheila Kassan. I've worked for 20-odd years in a career in civil engineering, and I can relate to everything you said. I'm going, yes, that happened, that happened. All of those things happened, and I was struck by a couple of things. I'm encouraging people into civil engineering, particularly girls, and I think, Stephen, you asked that question, how much of this reality do we actually give? And I have to say, I do give that reality to an extent. Probably not the level of brutality that I have faced in my career as a civil engineer. But I guess what concerns me is in the institution of civil engineers, we're currently at 2% at fellows, so there's 30% about at chartered, and the institution point this out. That's okay because we're the unassuming young girls, if you like, that we're not a threat. But when it comes to fellow, it drops to sort of 2%, which is terrifying. The institution of civil engineers think they've done an amazing job. And I have sort of heckled their president to say, I think that you should be fired if you feel that is a success. And I guess, you know, how in the world of engineering do we make it better without flexible working? And I wondered how you feel about that in the broader sense of increasing flexible working so that women post-children can go back to work and that sort of thing.
Yes, indeed. I have to say, I think the world of academia is very good for flexible working, whether you declare it or not. Now, I disguised the fact that when my children were small, I worked extremely flexibly. There was no way of doing it officially, so I turned up and gave my lectures, and I put in the hours, but I chose which hours I put in. And Cambridge is particularly good on this, because you could be in your college, so no one knows where you are. I think flexible working is really important, but I was very struck. I was in Newcastle a week or two back, and I was talking to some early career researchers there, and one of them had I guess, a return of fellowship of some kind, and she'd been allowed to work 60%, 80% or whatever it was on that. But when she became a lecturer on the staff and tried to work at the same way, no one, that became a real disadvantage. People gave her the full amount of teaching and then expected her to do everything else in the very little time that was left. And she said, how do we change that culture? And I think it is very hard if you work flexibly or part-time. There are people who don't take you so seriously, who think, you're not giving us 24/7. That's just not good enough. And I think that's inhuman. And, that's something else that...
Yeah, and I would only add that there is now, I'm sure you've seen the statistics for parental leave in parts of Scandinavia, for example, where it's now compulsory for males to take parental leave as well as females. And it changes the dynamic dramatically. And so I think that's something we really do have to look at, because I think flexibility for young parents particularly, but not only for that, for people who are caring for elderly, sick relatives or whatever. There are all sorts of caring responsibilities, or children or adults with certain disabilities. I think that's something we've got to think about for everyone, not on a purely gendered basis, because if we do that, I think we just actually reinforce some of the patterns. We're nowhere close to that. I can't pretend we are, because I do think that's a huge societal issue. We know already that when men have the opportunity to take parental leave, many of them don't, or they don't take as many. Well, that's right.
It's often still a disadvantage. I am very proud of the fact my son-in-law he took 6 months for the first child, and he's taken 4 for the second, I think. So that is hugely important, but it's not financially advantageous.
No, exactly.
And I think that the returning carers scheme has been very successful. So it's not quite the same thing, but if you've had any reason for taking more than 6 months off, I think, you can get a relatively small grant to spend on anything that will help your career. And that has been, I think that's made a huge psychological difference to people too, but it doesn't address the 2% civil engineers for sure.
Hi, I think my question was kind of overlapping with that. As kind of a young woman embarking into like an engineering career, I mean, the idea that you can still kind of have it all, have children, and then not affect your career is still something that everyone expects, that if you have kids, it's definitely going to affect your career. So, one thing we just discussed was having parental leave and how that would kind of rebalance that. But my question would be, after we implemented that, do you think that would change the conversation around why the gender pay gap exists? Because a lot of people would use, maternal leave as the explanation for that. And once we implement that, what do you think the next logical step would be to kind of close that gap again?
Well, I mean, as I said, part of the problem with the gender pay gap is the grade segregation. And that's a rather different issue. I mean, what you're talking about may affect things at the top end. I think we have to worry about the bottom end too. And that's a very different set of issues, which I don't really feel capable of or competent to answer. I don't know if you've got views on that.
Well, I would only say that I don't think that there's any single means of closing the gender pay gap. I think partly it is people who are out of careers and then come back in, and that tends to be more gendered at the higher ends, to your point, Athene. But there are other elements to it, because there is evidence that in some circumstances, partly maybe the double skirt phenomenon, if I may put it that way, women are not necessarily putting themselves forward or being encouraged to put themselves forward or being mentored to put themselves forward at the same rate of promotion that men get. In all this isn't just in academia, it's also in the business community. So that also, I think, has to shift over time. And then there are also very practical technical problems, such as whether there are awards for market pay increments in certain types of work, including academia, or where people might be more inclined to use an outside offer to ratchet up their pay. There's lots of evidence that men do that more than women, and part of that is men feel more free to move sometimes than a woman will feel. So there are all sorts of these pieces that have to be addressed at the same time, unfortunately, to get the gender pay gap to disappear. And happily, we're making incremental progress. At least it's going in the right direction, but it's just not going fast enough.
Question up at the back.
Hi. Based on your experiences of your career, it's a question for both of you, both working with women and obviously as a woman, in your case, do you have any advice that you would give for women starting out their careers and also for the people supporting them at that time?
That's a very big question. I think believe that you are as good as the next person, and I don't think all women do. And I think don't be fooled by other people's confidence, because most people's confidence is skin deep. And it's very easy to think, I'm the only one in this room who feels inadequate. I mean, that's to some extent the imposter syndrome. One of the first people I heard express that publicly was I was doing a kind of similar conversation with Alison Richard when she was Vice Chancellor. And she was talking about when she got accepted by Newnham. And she said, I assumed there was a clerical error in the offer letter. And, I expect if she'd asked her contemporaries at Newnham, many of them would have felt that. And it's really easy to think you're the only person who's got doubts, who doesn't believe. And, work through that. Look for sponsors and mentors. Look for people who you click with, who are a bit further up the ladder, to get advice from them. And it's often worth asking, what have I got to lose if I try something and it doesn't work? And often the answer is, a bit of self-respect for 5 minutes, but,
Do we need to teach in schools or encourage girls to be more pushy or less nice?
Well, some schools are teaching resilience too, which I think is quite important. I think, so the Institute of Physics did a lot of work some years ago in the classroom, looking at how teachers interacted with boys and girls in co-ed classes. And, they encouraged the girls to sit quietly in the corner and the boys jumping up and down. The boys got more chance to be pushy, if you like. Now, you can obviously, in teacher training, if there is time in the training, you can try and make people aware that that's what they're doing. And some of you in the room may have seen, what was it called? No More Boys and Girls in the Classroom. It was following a teacher teaching a class of 7-year-olds. And a brave man, because he came out as entirely reinforcing stereotypes and sort of was helped to overcome that. So yes, we probably should encourage girls to be more pushy, but maybe we need to encourage boys to be less pushy. I mean, it is all about societal expectations, and it's just everywhere, including in all of us.
Could I just add one piece? It's something I actually really struggle with. I think it's a fascinating and difficult question, because implicit in the question, and I don't think you mean this, could be that success is to be modeled on the basis of being pushy and arrogant, etc. And I would hope that that's not what ultimately we should be trying to achieve. To your point about
Absolutely.
making men, or thinking that men shouldn't necessarily be aggressive and pushy at all times. And I think it goes to your confidence piece. So to answer the earlier question, I agree with you that don't assume that just because someone has a loud voice and always is the first to put up his hand, that he actually is confident and has more to say. And somehow girls being confident enough to not be afraid of that and not to feel that they defer to it is really important, it seems to me. But that also requires someone to say to the boy who's always at the front, you don't always have to be at the front.
Yes, absolutely.
With some sorrow, I am going to draw us to a close, but we have worked you both very hard, and especially Athene. With the Rising Tide programme, we wanted to bear testament to the long struggle for educational equality and for equality at Cambridge, and to the experience of many people in this room and before us. We also wanted to provide space for a conversation. We think this is what great libraries and great universities should do. And I hope you feel we've done that tonight. I also hope that you will come across to the UL, all of you, and have raise a glass with us to the Rising Tide exhibition. My final task is to say thank you to the indefatigable. Thank you. Professor Dame Athene Donald, and also to our Vice Chancellor, Professor Toop, who has personally sponsored this programme, to which I say thank you. To both Athene and to Stephen, thank you.